The amuse-bouche.
Yeah, are you familiar?
What is that again?
It's a French term. It means to amuse the palate. It's the very first bite you get in a French dinner.
Oh, right. Yeah. To amuse the palate.
That's what it means. What it translates to, yeah.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, isn't it usually like some little kind of snacky type thing?
It's usually something so ridiculously rich that you only need one bite, and it takes you places before the meal even starts.
Really? Where'd you go?
Probably to France.
Sweet.
The rolling hills of Normandy, I imagine.
Yeah, never been. Have you ever been to France?
I haven't.
Do you want to go?
I've seen France by way of a hole in the wall.
What do you mean you've seen it by way of a hole in the wall? What does that mean? When you say things, I have to ask a lot of questions. Good thing I'm good at asking questions. What do you mean you've seen France by way of a hole in the wall? Are you talking about the hole in the wall where the men can see it all? That's I was watching Rick and Morty, the interdimensional cable, the first one, and Dan Harmon does like the Saturday Night Live introductions of the cast, and one of them is a hole in the wall where the men can see it all.
It's one of those things where, like, if you get the cultural reference, you can make the joke adjacent to it. There's layers. So a lot of the things that I seemingly say that are random are tied to some colloquial thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, which is a certain, language of its own in a way, right? Because if you don't get the reference, if you don't have the context, like Jenna will tell me, because she speaks fluent French and Spanish. There's just certain, I've heard from other people too, there aren't direct translations always available, right? Because it is like a contextual thing, and I know in some Asian cultures it's like a tonal thing as well. Different, it could be the same word but said in a different way, and it means something totally different.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with like your social location in the language itself, like how you relate to object, and how that. I always forget if it's syntax or. So
syntax.
I don't know that that's the word I'm looking for, though. There's one I just confuse it a lot. And
syntax, jargon, lexicon.
No, semantics.
Oh, semantics.
Semantics and syntax. But yeah, there's, a lot of Asian languages that talk about themselves in the third person. There's no I. And I think that the way that we pronoun things kind of drapes language around it, and how we kind of take poetic license with certain words and phrases.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Do you think that's more of a modern thing, or do you think that's more of a American specific thing or Western thing?
Well, at one point we were all indigenous to each other in the land. And I think there was just a more implication of we.
Right.
The interbeing part, that there is no me without you. And I think that because of colonization, that those things are expressed in our language. That I is probably the most common word that we all use.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about I and I, which is something the Rastafarians say, which relates the supreme identity to the self, the little s self, and I often, when I'm being conscious of it, when I comes out of my mouth, I try and open up that aperture so it is inviting in the I am consciousness into what I'm about to say. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that goes, but it's just something that I've been, as my awareness expands, to find opportunities to infuse that into my communications, internally and externally.
Well, this is we're opening up a big portal right here. I feel like, right? Because my mind is already starting to go to language and how it shapes reality, and how we associate within the given confines, borders, boundaries, structures that we create by how we label things. And in a way, I mean, you're Gen X, I'm millennial, we're about the same age. Like, we grew up in, I just did a thing there.
I know.
That is very particular to our generation, I feel, which is saying like as a filler word. We've become very casual in a sense with our language, almost in a sense. I get the sense that its origins are in punk, grunge, like rebellion. See, I'm doing it again. I'm noticing it more now. There's like, it's like, we won't speak your ways, right? Anytime we think of somebody that is very, prim and proper, aristocratic, hierarchical, colonizer, dominator culture, the British, right? We were their colonies at one point. So inventing a new language almost was the first stage of revolution. I'm totally off the cuff guessing here, but it seems to me that the deconstruction of a formal language is, in fact, some sort of escape plot or rebellion.
It could be used that way. We have to think about literacy when we talk about this, the written word.
Right.
Because when you write something down and you can read something, it allows you to organize in a way that extemporaneous speech doesn't, And I think there's what you were speaking to, at least initially, was reclamation. Mm-hmm. Like reclamation of some identity that I am not that. Mm-hmm. And in that, there's a lot of slang, for lack of a better word, that gets kind of picked up to kind of define self-identified affinity groups. Mm-hmm. And with the advent of things like the internet now, a lot of that slang can get mass adopted very quickly. And I think a lot of that has to do with that there's something spicy about it. Something spicy about having a word that means something that someone doesn't know, like some sort of code,
Yeah, if your Riz is slapping, then right. I don't even know if I said that right. But.
Right, and it's not right. But we can get definitions to that, but it doesn't have
Urban Dictionary.
It didn't come out of the zeitgeist of our social location. Mm-hmm. A lot of that stuff is born timely, and it's challenging for someone that's ahead in years a little bit to kind of like co-opt that in its truest sense. And, I guess that just like, because we're talking about it, I can think of so many conversations I had around my parents, in front of my parents, just ways to communicate information to my friends. When we had corded phones and we couldn't leave the kitchen, mm-hmm. I'd be able to check to see if there was cannabis there and if we needed to get some and how much it costs if we needed to get more. And,
do you remember what some of the codes, the secret language that you used is?
I'm thinking about an 1/8 inch of plywood.
Okay, wow.
My friends were skateboarders and they would build quarter pipes. So an 1/8 inch of plywood was not something completely, like not that my parents were on top of me monitoring what I was saying, but we have something in our awareness that when something is just amiss, it catches our attention, brings us into something that it's not background noise. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I think that a lot of the vernacular that we adopted was didn't have the awareness of what I was doing, but it felt like there was rebellion in it.
Yeah, because in a way you're existing in a different reality. I think Alison Gray has this painting that she calls Secret Language, and I really like it. I like it a lot because I have seen that in trip experiences. And it is one of those things, I feel like, if you aren't initiated with a profound psychedelic experience or entheogenic altered state experience where you have had access to being immersed in that world, in that landscape of art and this like transmission of secret language coming into you, you wouldn't know. You would just look at it and go, that's a nice, interesting piece of art.
Well, I mean, the dollar bill.
Whoa, man.
No, I'm just saying, like, we're
I'm doing my best Joe Rogan impression. Whoa.
Whoa, yeah.
Whoa, yeah, that shit's crazy. Jamie, pull that up.
No, right, but once you understand, once you know what you're looking at, then you see how that it's like infiltrating your experience. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It like turns everything on its ear, because something you think that is just as innocuous as what we circulate all the time actually has very high meaning and implication from a subsect of culture. Mm-hmm. And after a lot of my high mushroom doses, I'm pretty convinced that a lot of that Masonic information came from the plants. It just seems like that if it's being transmitted to me, I'm not unique in that, and I've had symbols come up that I didn't recognize, and I imprinted on one. It was a beehive, and I went on the internet and looked up Masonic beehive, and sure as shit, there's a Masonic beehive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they've kept people initiating into the unseen realms. And do you know anything about hobo signs?
No. Tell me about hobo signs.
So I don't know if it's still a thing, but people would adopt these almost like stick figure kind of ways to share information with other hobos. If there was an abandoned house, there would be a sign for you can have a fire here, or a sign for the people that live nearby will feed you.
Yeah.
But if you didn't know what you were looking at,
didn't mean anything. Yeah. Right. So, language for the initiated. And I do believe that we are sort of in the chrysalis phase, if you will, or like the bridge phase of slowly like the democratization of sigillistic powered language, symbols, logos. I feel like people are becoming more hip. It's interesting because a lot of the symbology, a lot of the vibrations that have sort of congealed into symbols are similar. I mean, there's structures that form. I mean, you were talking about the other day about water and crystals and that sort of thing. And when we look at nature, the sort of fractal Fibonacci sequence of things. So there's my estimation is that there's archetypal symbology.
That's the word I was going to use, but it's, and we've talked about this at length, like what was archetype before we named it?
Well, it still existed. It just didn't have a name.
Right. But the second we name it, it becomes a two-dimensional representation of what it actually is.
Yeah. Right.
So my question, and something that is a lot more easy for me to kind of internalize and have that inquiry, because it can be something that it can't be when it's codified into language. It can be a signature, an energetic signature, which is something in the last little tail end of my medicine work. The mushroom has been exposing me to different signatures so that I can perceive things without, at least in my internal experience, needing to figure out a poetic way to talk about it. And that doesn't become a thing until I have to share my experience with somebody else. And then we fall into the realm of simile and metaphor to approximate, you know? Yeah, these things have, you know, these morphologies, you know, what Rupert Sheldrake in the morphogenic field, you know?
Yeah, morphic resonance theory.
Yeah, so I think it's not by happenstance. It's
right.
It's something, the formless, filling in a template.
Yeah, the formless becomes formed and colored by the culture at the time. So I feel that where we're at right now is I sense a lot of people really looking to the past, which is great. You know, I think we can look to the past to kind of create a roadmap to the future, but we can't necessarily rely on, I mean, I see a lot of people what we would call appropriation, right? And people appropriating symbols and language and ceremonies and things like that. And the way I look at it is like we are in a crisis state and people are trying to bootstrap phase shift healing. And they don't know, we don't necessarily have the, I guess it's not really, we don't really have like the forge and the crucible to like alchemize what we need to move forward. So we're just leaning on what we've already built in the past or creating some gibberish that doesn't mean anything.
No, I think that, you know, much like, you know, there are examples on this planet of people at all stages of evolution that this is part of the process. And
what's part of the process?
To go in and appropriate, adopt these things that held significance and meaning. And I think that I can only use my experience as like a model of what could happen is to like go beyond the temporal expression of what that was and go farther upstream to what it was before it was codified, because it has some primal non-codified form.
Okay, all right, okay. So
archetype, you know, like...
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but we always label things, right? So either you're going in the direction of like having something exist that is more fluid, that is more of a living, breathing thing. And my mind is also sort of going to specifically the Native American indigenous population of the United States, prior to it being the United States. The language that they use, like your name would be one who works with mushrooms, or like, you know, something like that. Like that would be your name, right? So it's a different sort of way of giving identity and meaning to things.
So let me look. Okay, so at one point, a lot of this stuff was regionalized, just because of geographic features, or you know, people weren't sharing this information. Mm-hmm. And now we live at a time where this information can be shared. So I think that there's an opportunity to really suss out these common denominators in what these things are all approximations of. And then in the modern context, archetypalize them. You know, we don't have so many like wise old men to go see. So I oftentimes think of the mushroom as being archetypally the wise old man. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just like modern expressions of these, like what does the hero's journey look like in our modern setting? You know, what is the, like, what is that? You know, because when you look at these old stories, they were told in the language of where they were at. I often think about how a primitive person would describe a modern thing, like a street lamp. If you've only ever seen fire, how would you describe a street lamp?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a way to reclaim these archetypes in the modern context, and I think then people would identify them, and it would have more buy-in.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great if we could get a time traveler from the past to come here, because in a lot of ways, or, deconditioning yourself so much through various kinds of practices or experiences that you could have to really see outside of the mass of illusions that are carefully constructed to keep us binded in a symbolic and linguistic programmed reality.
Well, that might be the hack right there, is just to
get a time traveler,
emerge out of that.
Yeah.
So that we can hold all those things as conceptual self.
What do you mean by that?
So when you transcend, when you're in a transcendent state, it's almost like you can look backwards and see conceptual self, ego, however, your model of reality. You can appreciate that there's something you left behind by transcending it. And if we can, in mass, respectfully, and without bypassing, transcend these states, then we can hold our programming with a little more compassion. Then maybe the thing isn't to go in and fix it from that place, but is to actually go deep enough that we can all, through direct experience, know that this is an illusion and has its curriculum. Mm-hmm. And then we can show up differently.
Well, yeah, right. This reminds me of the McKenna quote, right? Like, if you know this, it's like the real magic is that language creates reality, and if you know the words, then you can create a new reality, kind of thing, right? And so that brings me back to the whole I concept and self. And in a lot of spiritual circles, men's healing work that I've done, like specifically men's masculinity work, psychedelic work, trauma therapy, somatic psychedelic assisted trauma therapy, just therapy in general, there's a tendency to I ownership. I take ownership of this. I take ownership of my trauma, my problems. I take responsibility. Even just in sort of mainstream general consensus influencer motivation stuff, it's all about like your responsibility, your ownership, your life, right? And it still sort of has this atomized view of things. So what I'm gathering a little bit from what you're saying is like, it's almost if we can orient around something bigger than our own individualized, self experience, this hyper personalized experience, every infinitesimal detail that's ever happened in our lives, figuring out who we are, it still keeps us in this like isolated self echo chamber. But if we could orient towards a place of actual like mass consciousness on a collective level, ourselves, our community, our relationships to things and stuff, that then we could actually branch out a little bit more in the reality creation, manifestation, abundance, hacking realm.
You were talking and I was thinking about Ram Dass, and he just has this cute way of looking into another being and say, how did you get into that one?
So.
Yeah. And it's so compassionate, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To see these binds that we get into because of this something that interrupted our way that we related to each other and the earth. And the elements and the ancestors and all of that. But I don't think the whole group of us gets to do the thing at once. I think we get to do it in pockets and form dialect around this stuff. And, I think a lot about our unique situation here in Colorado with natural medicines and what we can actually do with that the other 49 states are still draconian in the way that even simple possession of a mushroom is a felony pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of my work is this like systemic dismantling, and like the uncommodification of things. And it's challenging because the whole world is set up to commodify time.
Right.
And I think that says a lot of like where the root of our sickness is.
Yeah.
Most people are not going far enough upstream. So if I were to really think about the root cause and the illusion of separation, right? So we have to go back that far to affect their root, to affect everything.
Okay.
Everything else is just symptoms.
Okay. So this is how I think that we do it. This is how.
You got a plan?
This is my plan. When I worked in sales, after college, I worked in sales for a number of years. I remember a couple things. One, I remember that it takes somebody about 7 times hearing the same thing before they think it's a good idea for them to do. Like the sale doesn't necessarily happen by you persuading, forcing, convincing, or manipulating someone. A sale can happen that way, but the most effective sale is when they really internalize the idea and they get it from within, and
Inception.
They're like, oh yeah, because their best friend told them. Then the next day they heard it on a radio show that they listened to. Then someone brought it up in the office. Then they saw a billboard. Then they had a moment at the grocery store. So it's like all of these different hits. So where I'm going with this is that if everything that we've made in this reality we have created, and it's bound by the rules and regulations of the language that we construct for the time that we live in, then in order to phase shift into a new time, we've got to start communicating to people in places and spaces that they occupy that aren't in, the bubble that we live in the actual real, normie 3D world, and speaking to them in a language that they understand. Like my mother used to hide vegetables in food when we were kids and we didn't know it was there, right? So it's like hiding these little sort of cosmic linguistic keys in language that they can understand in normal settings that aren't, cacao ceremony, drum chanting, and ayahuasca and Bali, regular places where regular people are at, right? Because how else are they going to have their reality tunnel expanded if they're not privy to the kinds of things that we're involved with? This is my big gripe with the influencer culture of the spiritual, conscious, healing, psychedelic community, is that it's insulated. It feels a little too insulated. And when it's not insulated, it's hyper medicalized and sterilized and that whole thing.
Yeah, I guess how I look at it shifts a little bit every day. All
right, yeah.
Because there's a lot of this dismantling I've been doing, or a lot of internal dismantling around the concept of doing. That it's not anything you can do, but a state of being that can be transmitted.
Yes.
And from where I where I'm at right now, it's like I don't have direct experience with that, but I have this sense that that's where that evolves to. That's the Pokemon's final form, if you want to think of it, the Charizard. You know? Years ago, I saw the Dalai Lama speak. And this is before I knew anything. And when he would giggle, the whole room would you could just feel it. Like the hairs on your arms would stand up. It was like, what? And I hear, coming back to Ram Dass again, just because I really listen to him a lot. And he just talks about being in the presence of these beings, that you just get high. And here in our culture, we just don't even know that's on the menu.
I take a little issue with that. I challenge that because it's like, this is what I'm going to compare it to. I'm going to compare it to Jerry Seinfeld, the stand-up comedian, now. Right? Now. People who go to see Jerry Seinfeld are already excited. They're already fans of his. They are geared up. They are ready to laugh. All he has to do is say, hi! And everyone's like, oh my God, Jerry. Because they've been conditioned and primed over the years, laughing at the show, knowing who he was, laughing at little clips they see, YouTube. They know he's the funniest comedian in the world. He's very rich. He's very famous, right? So the way that I push back at that is that it's a chicken and egg. It's a paradox kind of thing. It's like, had no one told you that the Dalai Lama was this enlightened being that carries this great resonant energy with him, would you still feel the effect?
That's before I knew anything. I didn't even know what Buddhism was, really.
Right, but you were still around people who were believing that, and they were giving off an energy priming you to have that experience. They're sending energetic signatures. This is a whole reality creation, placebo. Right, that's what I'm saying. But where I want to get to, this is turning into Rush Limbaugh, but on psychedelics. This is where I want to get to. People, it's Alex Jones. Never mind. Where I want to get to is seeing the cashier, God in drag, right? Like the little everyday moments, the everyday people. What can we do? How can we be in our regular lives, going about our, like Obi-Wan hiding out from the Republic, still operating in secret, right? So this concept of not necessarily glorifying, deifying, putting on a pedestal, or priming and conditioning people like, this is an enlightened being, you're supposed to have this kind of experience, but this sort of almost like mere proximity effect kind of thing, where people are more likely to sort of surrender when they're around people that are familiar with that, like they speak their language, they kind of look like them, they sound like them.
I mean, I can only speculate.
But they're an enlightened being.
I can only speculate.
Great. This is all we've been doing. All I do is speculate. Right, well, maybe that's the name of the show. Speculate.
But when we ask the question how, it's like I guess it's because on a really deep level we want that. Okay. We want that. Sometimes I just take a few minutes to just feel free. Just like I don't have to like work. I don't have any demands on me. Just like what does free feel like? We get like some visitations with that, depending on if we're doing activities we really like, or we're in a state of awe or something like that. And the reality that most of us are in is just like some sort of defense posture, and I guess the how question doesn't always get asked. I don't always ask it to myself because it's like I don't have the bird's eye view. I can't even begin to like, because my how is so informed by my conceptual model of reality, my karma, my desire, like all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. that's how that even the question itself is like, there's implications in the question itself.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's more about being, though. You know, I want to move away from the how and just focus on the being, because I think that everybody has had an experience of being around someone that changes their consciousness, but they weren't expecting it, or they didn't know it, or no one told them about it, or other people weren't geared up for it. But, you know, that one friend who's sort of like the life of the party, who's just in a good mood, like who's just that magnetic personality, and you know that you just get caught up in it, and that mirror neuron thing, and now you're sort of absorbing that energy, right? Same thing negatively. I mean, I think for the most part, our world is fear-based, scarcity-based, a lot of real like hard, thick negativity, cynicism, and people get real sucked into that. So if it could happen there, it could happen the other way around too, right? So yeah, I think of it as more of like secret agents for change, in a way of just really, so being free really means like being your authentic self, and being your authentic self requires a certain level of imagination, which we're sorely lacking in our world today, I feel, right? Oftentimes when I see clients, coaching clients or somatic therapy clients, I will ask them sometimes, like, what is like, just what is your most idealistic situation? If you could be anything, have anything, just go nuts, go wild. It's, you know, part of a series of like 22 questions of an assessment. A lot of times people limit themselves without even really knowing that they're limiting themselves, right? Like, what's freedom? Oh, you know, just sit on my porch and drink Budweiser, you know? And it's like, really? That, you know, like, what do they say about 9/11? Failure of imagination, right? Hillman talks about this too. Like the imagination, the ability to imagine, to see, feel, create in the mind's eye and in your experience, to really go beyond the predetermined coloring lines and start creating something different. So I think that we're really getting into a lot of saucy stuff right here, you know, spicy sauce coming. Because it's like imagination, autonomy, individuality,
well, I mean,
authenticity.
But all these things it's still overlaid with this colonial way of even thinking about expressing that stuff. You know, I was just thinking, like, our imaginations are colonized. We can't imagine ourselves out of this, because we can only imagine in terms of things that we've experienced. Man, and it's it's layered on thick right now because of the algorithmic bubbles that we're in. You know, the data shows that this is going to be successful. People click on this, people watch this, people like this. So let's just keep making more of that. So we are literally like running on a hamster wheel of stunted creativity. Yeah.
For the most part.
Well, I have to like borrow perspective. You know, I still do that stuff, but somehow, whether it's my plant medicine work or something, like I still get to like at least think I experience a bigger picture than that. Mm-hmm. You know, I still have like
beyond the boundaries of
right to see that
colonizer,
and it's still like, you know, I guess how they talk about like the monkey brain. Mm-hmm. Like I still like see those things play out in my life, the things I reach to get the dopamine hit or whatever, and then there's some like higher order things that are happening in my experience. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I just, for lack of better way to talk about it, you know, the hyperspace has been this, this environment that just makes my programmed self seems so small. Maybe not small, but like that it's a much, like it used to be my entire experience. And then these expanded states, especially like, you know, what people often refer to as ego death experiences. It's really given me this entirely different perspective that stuff's like 1% of my experience.
What stuff is 1% of
my
your
programming, like who I thought I was and all of my problems and everything that makes up Travis.
Right.
You know, because even when I pronoun me nowadays, me is not, Travis is not all of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, again, my problems, you know, I would argue, you know, like they're same, but different. Many people are going through the same kinds of things.
You just triggered something. One of my big Crestone experiences last year, the medicine was like, it's our depression. It's our anxiety, you know, really challenging the ownership part of it, you know, to hold it in the collective. And I thought that was very, what's the sentiment is like, I'm not the only one, you know what I mean? That this is like a shared experience, and there's something like very comforting in that. But at the same time, like it challenged the way that I was, trying to treat it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Tell me more about that.
That as long as I keep individualizing my healing, that it's not, there's like something greatly lacking from that I need to, it's like healing in community, healing with the land, healing holistically. This is what I'm talking about. Like you can't just do it as a one isolated environment.
Yeah, we literally can't. I mean, we've enmeshed ourselves in connectivity so much on one level, yet people feel more isolated and estranged and, you know, depressed and checked out and numb. And so it's like, okay, well, you know, if the machine wants us to be connected but isolated, then we've sort of got to, you know, come from our isolated states to a place of connectivity, real connectivity, to collectively work ways out of these things, right?
Yeah, it's, you know, just that same experience. I got this really big transmission from the land, and it said, unless the land is involved, there's no actual healing taking place. And I had never ever like thought of it like that. And then the next thing that came was that, yeah, your human centric models are pathetic. And then as I'm reeling from that, the next thing that came through was, look, all you need to do is bring people to the land, bring people to me, give them the medicine, and get the fuck out of the way. And I like,
wait, you don't need to charge them $8,000?
well, not me, but it let me off the hook in this weird way that there's things that we can interface with that are unfathomably wiser than we are if we just get out of the way.
Yeah, so this is back to what we currently would call archetypal forces, animistic forces, soul in the world, the soul of things, the life of things. You know, for the most part, anybody that lives it, I mean, most people are not living off the grid. Most people don't live in rural areas. Most people are connected. They're in towns. They're in cities. And it's a dead environment. It's dead. The trees...
Well, sterile.
Sterile, right.
Sterile.
The grass in the front lawn that I water on a sprinkler rotation every day does nothing except appease my landlord who wants me to do that. Right. But we, you know, this is, I'm stealing this from Alan Watts. He once talked about this sort of the ornaments, the ornamental nature, the ornamental aspect of our consciousness that sort of sequesters nature into these little categories purely for really like one sense experience, which is like visual, which is not a full aesthetic alive experience. It's a hollow, shallow, dead experience. It's like the beautiful woman who is a absolute evil, like cruel person.
I wonder I wonder if that was like a survival compensation, because we like in the gradient of disembodiment, is vision like the last thing we hold on to before we like completely disassociate?
Well, we're such a visual heavy.
But do you hear what I'm saying here?
Is vision the last thing we hold on to before we disassociate?
Completely disassociate. Well, vision is like the last bastion of like being in our bodies. So we've done all of this aesthetic because that's what we have control over. That's our power. Like that's where we feel empowered, and that we can change something and see that it's changed.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
do you know what I mean? Like just as somewhere in our past was raped and pillage, our bodies were obviously not a safe place to be.
Okay, right. So I want to get back to that because I'm going somewhere else. But
okay.
Please jump in if I'm deviating too far.
No, that's all right. It's just like I was just like thinking if that's like just the last thing that we hang on to,
the last thing that we're clinging on to,
without being completely disembodied. Because if we felt, then we would have empathy.
Okay, yeah, that's right, exactly, and we don't, because, well, for the most part, and when I talk about we and all this kind of stuff, what I'm really saying is the general consensus culture that is incentivized in order to maintain power and authority to keep people numbed, anesthetized, depleted, right? And on certain drugs and, drinking alcohol to forget about their problems and whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's important to pronoun as little as possible, especially in cases like that. Because it's just important.
Yeah.
Because it requires like buy-in from the other people that you're weeing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the ones that wee all over everyone else that don't care. But they don't but they're victims too. I mean, they're the people that are in the positions of power that work at the companies and in the government and in the power elite class. They are also suffering. It's like the warden of the prison is still in prison, Yeah,
it will,
because there's limitations, because we've created the limitations based on the language and the symbols of reality of like what you could have, right? So I call it like fake plastic trees, Radiohead song, right? It's like we don't get real trees, we get fake plastic trees. And what do? They are visual. They are for the eyes, but they're hollow. There's no depth. There's no life in them, right? So, I'm like, how many people, if you ask them, it's like, okay, well, why do you manicure your lawn and why do you take care of things? It is a visual thing. It's not because, well, how many people would say like the joy that they get? The joy that they get is usually a visual joy. I'm going to go home. I'm going to watch something. My garden looks so nice, right? I'm dating this new woman. She's a real looker. It's very rarely, I really enjoy my property because the sounds of the birds in the morning and the trees ruffling.
But you're talking about Dominator culture.
Yes, exactly.
Which
That's
is
what
like domination.
Well, Terence said that, so I don't want to.
But domination, even dominating the visual landscape.
Right.
Do you know what I'm kind of like
totally
flesh out a little bit,
dominating the visual landscape.
It's the easiest thing to do.
Killing people's souls through a dead landscape, an ugly environment.
Well, it's just the easiest thing to do. Like, you can only generate a sound for so long. It has an attack and a decay. There's a smell usually runs its course. You know, like I feel like that's the whole thing, is like this compensatory permanence.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Hillman in his book, we've had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world's getting worse, which I'm going to do a whole video series on. He says in early on in the book that he's like, you know, people are sitting under these brightly lit fluorescent lights all day in these cubicles, driving them completely mad, yet they go to their therapist's office and wind up talking about, you know, what the light represents or what the office represents or the cubicle represents. Or maybe they don't even get into that stuff, but they're talking about something else. Meanwhile, it's the lamp that's diseased. He says it's like it's the office building that's sick, right? So again, we're there's something here: beauty, aesthetics, images, senses, language, symbols, the environment, the landscape. Like, a big part of this new show is really about this, you know, is about the external world and what it's doing to us and how we can participate and collaborate to co-create things that are more human-centric, right? That are actually going to awaken us, awakened by the environment. I mean, you walk in, there's a reason why a Roman Catholic church, it looks the way it does. You walk in, there's frankincense burning, there's painted glass. You know, there's a reason why Alex and Alison Gray at Cosm built the Entheon. It's like a temple, right? Like it evokes a certain kind of experience the second you step into that thing. You know, not just from seeing, from feeling.
Yeah. How do we rewild in those contexts?
How do we rewild in these contexts?
Yeah, I'm like thinking about, you know, the overt and covert way of evolving, quote unquote, evolving consciousness through those means.
Yeah, see,
but it's like
I don't think we're evolving consciousness.
Well, it's like I feel like we just built a box with nicer features.
Yeah, I think it's activating remembrance. I think when people are struck by things that activate them prior to labels, prior to compartmentalized labelization of everything, they have that primal, deep connection to this thing evokes something in me, right? Like when we went on the hike, it was like all those people showed up there. Most of those people showed up there so they could take pictures, right? One sensory input organ, the eyes. It was an ocular feature, right? But I do think that there's something deep down in them that knows I feel a little bit better when I'm in nature. I like to go hiking. I like to be in the woods. So they're sort of orbiting around the real thing, yet they're still in the sort of dominator, extractor mindset of acquiring an ocular experience.
How did you put it? You're talking about
the acquisition of experience. Yeah, they want like you capture, right? Like when people talk about a photograph, you capture an image, you hold on to the image, right? You own this image now.
I wonder if some of that language was more, you know, like because you used to actually capture the photons onto silver nitrate. Mm-hmm. Literally, the literal photons that would bounce off things you were trapping in this process. Mm-hmm. You know, but yeah, there's, you know, coming back to that, like I just think that there's something in us that wants wants the freedom.
Yeah, that's that deep-seated primal desire that you're talking about prior to us putting the labels on it. It's the archetypal urge to break through, to be free, right? But we don't know what to be free into.
Well, what if it's just the urge to remember?
That's what I'm saying. So my idea is becoming, being, and moving about the world and behaving in such a way that you naturally, not even trying, activate remembering in other people and places and things. It's like, oh yeah.
Again, I just go back to my high dose mushroom work is where I've had access to those things where it's like something is a memory I didn't even know I had. And then all of a sudden it was like no convincing required. Mm-hmm. It's like, duh.
Yeah. And what do you experience when you experience a memory? Like, where I'm going with this is we're so visually in a trance, hooked in, stimulated. But what happens when you remember?
You get a part of yourself back.
Yeah, you get a deep feeling.
I guess ask the question another way. It's like a portal to access that which is accessible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a portal to access that which
is accessible.
I mean, sort of. I mean, but I feel like people don't even know that it's accessible because there's this veil. It's right. Like I think about like the difference between watching pornography versus actually having sex, right? Like there's a massive difference there. But if we're so geared towards
depends on what age you are.
I suppose. But still, if you haven't had the experience, or psychedelics, for example, is another, these are altered state experiences. You're in a time stands still. You're in a sort of a flow state. Try explaining a psychedelic experience to someone. You might pique their interest, but they're not going to know what it's like until they've actually experienced it. Because you get the depth, the full thickness, the circumference, the range, the senses, the downloads.
Well, that's why we invest in so much how we develop a poetic way to talk about this stuff and also talk about the difficulty of talking about it. Mm-hmm. The Plato's allegory of the cave. Mm-hmm. It's this really interesting way to let somebody know that I can only explain to you in the language of two-dimensional shadows, mm-hmm. but just know that I'm reporting from a world of color and form and sound, but in order to connect with you, I need to use metaphor and allegory and all of these things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't be able to perceive like a seventh dimensional object in our.
Well, I know that, but it's still like it's bringing that into the conversation itself. You know, it's like because I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always with these experiences. Mm-hmm. I was in the shadow world mm-hmm. entirely, mm-hmm. And that's how I communicated, and that's how I internally thought about things, and then all of a sudden my aperture widened. Yeah,
it like slowly, the layers slowly peeled away over time.
Right, and so I was around a couple of beings, one in particular that very, very Icarus type. That he was so hot for those spaces that he didn't keep a foot in the other world, the consensus world. So one of the favors I guess I did myself was to just commit to keeping a foot in both worlds, even if it was like dull and tedious. I did it anyway, so that I didn't get untethered in that way.
Yeah, I think we desperately need that, and we need the people who are so far outside of it, right? Who are sort of pushing the envelope, pushing the boundaries, that are really untethered and get to live in that sort of prima materia world.
Well, so this right. But this is the whole right. It's like they're the people that left the cave and never came back.
They're far out there. It's like the Overton window. It's like they're out there. Something wild and far out is happening, and you might be able to see flashes of it, right? But it's like a signal poster in the distance, and then you have people who, more like you, are sort of like, you keep kind of coming back into the cave and walking out with people, and
yeah, and I guess my touch has been changing over the years, because I used to be so convinced that everybody needed to have these experiences.
Sure, I think that's a necessary phase. I was in that phase too.
Well, that's evangelism.
Yeah.
And how do we feel when representatives of another religion show up at our door and try and sell us on that? It's like, I know where you guys are if I know where, if I get interested.
Sure.
I got this clear insight from the mushroom, and they said, I they them sometimes, which is funny, but not everybody has to take the medicine to benefit from it.
Right.
So not everybody has to leave the cave to benefit from it.
Right.
And just like that insight in Crestone with the land, like there's these big things that I feel like I get let off the hook more, or at least my story of who I am, my savior self, gets let more and more off the hook. And I think that that's such like a powerful place to speak to, that everything is going to do what it's going to do. And if you are conscientiously waking up, if you're waking up, then do what you can with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody plays their part, and it's all necessary in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, in the movie The Matrix, like there's the guy who operates the computer and like tracks people in there. There's like the person that hooks you up. There's the one that goes in, or the couple that go in. That everybody has a role. I think a lot of people feel a little bit like aimless. Like, well, what can I do? Like, it's so big. Like,
that's learned helplessness that we were talking about at great length. The other day.
Yeah.
And it's like, work on yourself.
Right. Well, yeah, work on yourself and continuously keep. Well, how do I want to say this? I guess like, the more seeds being planted, the more bountiful the garden will grow. Like I think of the example of like, I've been telling my parents about mushrooms and ayahuasca and psychedelics and this and that. And it wasn't until it appeared in a language that my dad can understand, and something that is like legitimate and verified in the New York Times, that he sent me an article like 6 years later, like, hey, they're talking about mushrooms can help people with depressions, just like you said, right? And it's like, so it takes time.
Well, I have my own story too.
Yeah, planting those seeds.
My mom called to tell me that Anderson Cooper was talking to Prince Harry about mushrooms.
Yeah.
And, when we decriminalized mushrooms years ago, she said to me, your dad and I don't know if you did a good thing or not. Because we don't think people should go to jail for mushrooms, but at the same time, we don't think everybody should have them.
Yeah.
And that's just like like in the span of 4 or 5 years, it's just been wild to see how the cultural conversation has started to penetrate everyday people's lives from these places where we've put our trust,
Yeah.
The New York, would you say the New York Times?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, if the New York Times says it, then.
Yeah, I mean that's a thing. You know, I remember I had Lorenzo Haggerty on the pod on Mycadelic. He's the host of, he curates a podcast of like McKenna and Robert Anton Wilson and Alan Watts talks and other people. I think he does Watts, but a lot of McKenna, Ram Dass. And he was turned on to MDMA before it, I think when it wasn't even criminalized, right? So he sort of like had this fear-based thing around drugs, and drugs are bad, and you know the background of like, well, you could go to jail for drugs or you could ruin your life for drugs, but hey, here's one that's legal and people say they have a good time with. So the all of a sudden the fear is gone. You know,
you're talking about collective set and setting,
mm-hmm. Right?
Which is something that we don't think about until it's named.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is like, you know, we tell. Just look at the environment that we live in. If you don't think we live in an insane and sick environment, just look at what how we prepare people for altered state experiences. We're like, make sure that you're in a safe place. Don't go out into the world interacting with people and whatnot. You know, don't take mushrooms in Times Square. You'll have a bad trip, right? It's like, well, like, why is that? You know, you wouldn't say, like, you go into the forest, you're gonna have a great experience. Talking with birds and skipping along and looking at the leaves waving at you, the trees smiling. The environment is so sick and toxic and disgusting and miserable and soulless that you would never tell someone to take psychedelics in the environment because they would be like, Jesus. Maybe we should. Maybe it'd be like, hey, go take some mushrooms, go downtown and look at this bullshit.
I mean, I think that just speaks to the amount of bandwidth that we put into like the suit that we need to adorn when we go out into the world in that way. And when the model is softened, that looks different for every person, and how tightly they grip to that.
Sure. Well, sure. The collective consciousness of the Denver, Colorado area is different than the collective consciousness or the collective energy of the New York City area.
True, but I still think that's like I think some people have a predisposition to that type of action, and I'm trying to think of it, or like what the medicine is actually doing, and then there's the whole thing. You know, each one of us holds these medicines differently,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you know, a lot of these things are based on not outright black swan events, but, you know, something that doesn't happen that often, but puts the fear in everyone, mm-hmm. and then mm-hmm. just becomes a general precautionary tale that also seeds a preconceived notion.
Right. Again, with the language.
Yeah.
The language creates.
But I'm like thinking about, you know, what was it about me that I never, you know, like the one time that I had a rough go at it, I wouldn't call it a bad trip, but I had a lot of anxiety around having to move, and I had taken some LSD, and I knew that a few days from there I had to fly back to Pittsburgh where I was living and pack up a whole house. Like I knew it was just a daunting task, and then I just like succumbed to the, I guess just the sheer size of the job itself, you know, and I don't like, you know, like I don't even call them bad trips, but I do have difficult experiences, but mm-hmm. I navigate them.
Yeah, but you're also adept at that.
No, I know, but I'm just, you know, I don't know what predisposed me to like, in a group of people when I was 15, I was the one that would like lead everybody on the walks and do the, you know, like I had some sort of like.
Well, James Hillman would say that it is your daimon, your soul's calling, is the thing that you're born with a certain kind of blueprint, if you will, not a destiny, not fate, but more of an inner blueprint, like the acorn holds the blueprint to grow into an oak tree. So already at a young age, you were doing the thing that you are destined to do. You're the calling of your soul, which I
can connect a dot
like
there.
that.
I can connect a dot there. But so often I catch myself like creating story, and I'm like, well, I don't, like there's no, like I don't have direct experience around it, but it feels like like my mind can land like, oh yeah, that makes total sense, right?
Well, we got to make sense of things, I feel like, right?
Well, we
got to try to make sense of things.
We have a certain amount of fatigue around trying to hold ambiguity.
Yeah.
And then I think we just run out of steam and then have to land somewhere.
Right.
Oh, right. That's the easiest. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Give me the TLDR. Everyone wants the TLDR. Too long. Didn't read. Just tell me about it. What are the facts? What are the takeaways?
That's interesting about ambiguity fatigue, paradox fatigue.
Well, I mean, it's again reinforced by the boundaries imposed on us by the symbols and the agreements constructed by the language, because people don't have the time to hold paradox and nuance and complexity and ambiguity.
Do you know how yin works, right? You just hold that position until your muscle just can't, and then it gives. It just surrenders. It submits, or I don't know, however you want to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the rational mind, just it reaches its limitations in that way, and just it has to land somewhere.
But how hard are we even trying?
Well, I think the trying is like the maladapted part.
Well, right. It's like
we're trying to because the ambiguities, the ambiguity is truer than the binary, than the place where you land.
Yeah, but we are in we live in a binary world. It's either good or bad. It's Republican or Democrat.
That was imposed on us.
Yeah, right, exactly. This is what I'm saying. The dominator culture with the language and the symbols confined, right? We talked about this the other day about when was this switch, and I discussed this on the previous podcast. I really think that from an animistic worldview or a pantheism worldview to a mono, everything is monotheistic. One God, one crop, one ring to rule them all.
I mean, do you think that's an inverse relationship to the mono, the self? The individualized self can only create God in its image.
Yeah.
The interbeing self appreciates there is no place God is not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Which is a double negative, but I like the way it sounds.
Yeah.
The omnipresence.
Yeah. But, I think we've just kind of landed ourselves in this pickle.
Well, that's the animist thing.
Yeah. Yeah. God is everywhere.
Or that everything is a lot, however we want to words, right?
Everything is alive. Everything has life. Everything has soul. Everything is God. Yeah. And I kind of look at it in terms of expansion and contraction, in breath, out breath. We've just kind of collectively as a species been holding our breath for the last, 8,000 years or something like that. This is a contraction period. And eventually we'll get sick of it and want to expand past it.
The Kali Yuga, or however, you ever see that documentary, The Great Year?
Mm-mm.
James Earl Jones narrates it.
Oh, nice.
It's about the 26,000 year procession of the equinoxes.
Wow, James Earl Jones does that? Cool.
So it talks about the veil and the seasons of the veil, in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some beings that's not that's not the rule of thumb, the rule of veil.
Yeah.
I mean, like if that's a function of the time that we're living in, like it makes that how question even more irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a function of the time we're living in because we're living in.
No, well, I'm just holding it a little differently. If that is a, Charles Eisenstein, the first time I met him, explained astrology. He said, if you know the forces that are acting with and against you, then you can act accordingly. And it made me look entirely different at what I was trying to wrap my head around, So if there's these forces that are maintaining ignorance, then it's just like, I guess it's even easier to be appreciative that hypnosis, and some level and infinitesimally small, isn't as ensnaring me.
Yeah. I mean, why do people like to go to magic shows? They like to be fooled. We like to suspend our disbelief and be tricked. And some of us have been at the magic show for a long time. We've seen it a bunch, and we kind of get the gist of it. And we're like, all right, time for a new show. But some people are just hooked, and they're entranced in. And they're like, no, I want more. I haven't had enough yet.
That goes back to, we were talking about Krishna. Is it today?
Yeah, say that again.
That one of the devices that Krishna deploys on us is he allows us to take our illusions as far as they'll take us.
Yeah.
Because
right.
He knows that when we've reached the end of that, then we'll be receptive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That, thinking about that obviously didn't answer the bigger questions that I've been holding intergenerationally or even within the span of a lifetime. And I think a lot of people get access to that truth at the very, very end. Mm-hmm. At the very, very end. Mm-hmm. They're just like, oh, right.
Yeah.
Without enough time to report back.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And it's so I want to expedite this because I think we could have a cooler world, a world that's more suitable for us in our lifetimes.
Then we need to model the Amish in some type of way. Like we somehow live adjacent to society and create goods and services that society wants, and that's how we sustain ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I think it's I always wonder about the generational thing, because we in the span of our lifetime we had the choice to drop out, and when one of the traps of that culture is that they let their young go run about the cabin, run about the world as 18-year-olds, but they're not equipped to actually do that. Mm-hmm. They're not, it's like they don't really have a choice. They have to, if they, they have to come back to that. So I would like to figure out a way to build in this way to be in the culture so that our young are buying back in from a place of, because they know what they don't want.
Yeah, well, that's a huge thing. I mean, once something becomes sort of normalized and accepted, then it's perpetuated. But if normal looks a little bit different than what the general consensus culture is. Yeah,
I'm just thinking about I grew up next to a family that didn't let their kids watch TV. And they also hunted and fished. They were a family that moved up from Philadelphia, and then they became homesteaders, and they homeschooled their kids, and they kind of isolated them from a lot of things. They weren't socialized in certain ways. And the first movies that the little boy saw were The American Tail, Five Goes West,
Yeah.
and Bambi.
Mm-hmm.
And he was convinced that animals talked because he just didn't know that was just like a depiction of something, you know. And I think a lot about that. You know, it's like those children that get reared by wolves and they're never able to be socialized, you know. So to be like, to have access to be able to be in the world, but somehow be informed by way of like a really integral family structure, to be able to be resilient in the world.
Yeah, some kind of early bodhisattva incubation program.
Well, yeah, I testified at, well, we were going to testify at the Capitol, and my testimony was all about like, I didn't need to be protected from the world. I needed to be ready to engage the world.
Yes, right.
And
you don't want to be nerfed from it. You want to have the tools to navigate it.
yeah, and you know, something that I couldn't figure out how to humbly put in my talk was this. I felt like I was constantly being put in a round room and being told to pee in a corner. And the first example that came of that was like being told to focus, but they never taught us how to focus.
Mm-hmm. Or what to focus on, or why.
Or how to handle complex emotions, or, you know, like just human 101, as the way I see it, human 101 now.
Right.
But you know, I think there's this necessary part of like, creating resilient little beings that can go into these worlds and like see these things compassionately, because they have a place to come back to that like makes way more sense.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I think a lot of times we look at solving issues and problems, but really what you're speaking to, and I agree with, is like really getting to the root. New beings coming into the world. You know, I'm going to be a father. Like, I want my child to come into a world where they get to really see the illusion and know how to navigate it, but also know that like what their core is. You know,
Yeah.
and so generationally, things can change a lot faster when you have a lot more kids like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think about how I was ostracized, you know, for my socioeconomic status. You know, I lived in just a step above a dirt floor log cabin.
Right.
And it was
yeah,
like,
you're like the psychedelic Abe Lincoln.
Now that I'm past it, it's part of my origin story, but it was such like my body and my environment was not a safe place to be. So I lived in a lot of fantasy worlds. And it's not even until this point in my life that I'm even recognizing that the present moment eluded me, because my fantasies were way safer. I could access the feel good feelings that I couldn't in my reality.
Right. Yeah. So how much could we collectively change in the world if people can have those realizations earlier?
Yeah, but it still doesn't change a good-natured child going into an environment like that and getting ostracized because that's what the kids do. It's still an initiation.
Yeah, well, the kids from the general consensus reality.
Right. So
But if you have more kids who are...
But I don't know. But I feel like there's something that seems very workable to me, but I'm not wise enough to like, I don't have the answer.
Well, if you did, you'd have to drink hemlock.
Yeah, he's, I often say that my activism lies between the word Ubuntu and the gadfly.
Yeah.
That's
What
like,
is Ubuntu again?
I am because we are.
Right.
You know, that's like service to other as self, and then the gadfly is the determination to stimulate society into action.
Well, yeah, I think we need a healthy dose of both, right? It's like, yeah, we definitely need the action part. You know, I mean, I just think about like the decriminalization in 2019, like that was there's a lot of people with a lot of good ideas and but that happened because people took action collectively together.
You know, it's a small group of rebels taking on the empire story. And it felt that way when we were doing it. No one actually think we could pull it over the line.
Sure.
I remember the day after before we found out that we had passed, when the media was making fun of us and they brought up the 2015 ballot initiative that was going to create parking spots for UFOs and develop a working board as part of the Denver government to deal with extraterrestrial stuff. It didn't pass, but they brought it up in the same conversation.
Right. Well, people that for the most part, like ridicule, making fun of people is like the first sort of reaction to something that is outside the norm.
Oh, I appreciated that, but it was just such like a, you know, I guess going back to Star Wars, you know, you don't always get to take a role in that and do it. So it really was like an echo. Yeah. You know, and it like, all this stuff had deadlines, you know, it wasn't just like we could just do it till it was done. It was like we had to do it by a certain date and,
right.
You know, so it just,
yeah, you operated within the confines and the structures and the language of the Dominator culture.
And in hindsight, you know, it's been really wild to see that when you go into the source code, how things are affected. Right. You know, people are so curious nowadays, and their curiosity is like not met with criminality.
Yeah, so be a node of curiosity within the source code.
Yeah, we're just thinking about how laws kind of do that, you know. A lot of law is really good social contract stuff, but a lot of stuff is just so much control and really big, like, misdirections of how we could be holding things as health issues instead of criminal issues.
Right. Yeah.
Because an addict isn't a bad person, and we do that. We do that to homeless too.
Yeah. So, we call them the homeless, as if they're that's just like stagnant group of people that are just they don't fit within what we've decided is normal and acceptable.
Yeah, but
otherize them.
Yeah, just going back to working on the campaign, it's just I was content to rebel in the ways and means that I would have, as a counterculture personality. And it's like we took this underground thing and like made it and brought it out into the light, and it stayed viable.
Yeah, and anyone can do it.
In 26 states.
Something.
Yeah.
You can do something. Yeah.
Yeah. In Pennsylvania, where I'm from, it's a lot harder of a sell. You have to have a lawmaker sponsor it and bring it into the legislature internally, and it's just a much, much harder sell. But when you take things to ballot initiative, like there's so many things that the public feels a certain way, but the representative government isn't acting like they're representing the people. So the ballot initiative process allows that movement, that faster movement, that progression, and speaks to the what the current temperature is culturally.
I like that a lot. Yeah. What's your current temperature right now?
Today I've been running a little hot. I've just been like really, just a lot of things are trying to land. A lot of really big things. You know, a lot of the things we talked about on our hike, and just like, I think a lot about Kerouac's, you know, that quote he has about being mad for the world and being into people that were mad, and just like sometimes I feel voracious in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like one of my preferred states if I have enough cushion, you know, that I can like be in those states. So right now I'm in a good place. I have like cushion to be contemplating a lot. You know, I have no like all of my survival needs are taken care of, and I'm getting good sleep, and it's like the insight part of a psychedelic experience, but elongated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot like sort of like up in the air, out there, like interesting, and it's gonna like sort of have that landing. It's gonna start landing.
Well, I have to start doing the research part of it now. I have all like the things have lit up, but I don't have enough. I don't have enough of a base to start really working with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a lot of it right now is around water.
I want to have some of that water.
Yeah, around archetypes, around my responsibility as a storyteller, and you know, to be, what's being alluded to me is that I can be more impactful by encoding this stuff. I was telling somebody about how George Lucas had studied Joseph Campbell's work.
Yeah.
And then I was, you know, because sometimes I have to perspective take, like, you know, what can I do that is going to cause activations in somebody? So I'm like having this, like, that model. And then as I was talking, I was thinking about my braid and how Star Wars has impacted my life, and that information was encoded in that. So I don't have to speculate that there's fruits to that labor. I'm seeing it directly in my own experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That the way that was encoded shaped my life. It like activated things in me.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
You know, for the people that can't see me, I have a Padawan braid, and I've had it since 2013. And I was watching The Phantom Menace, and I was early enough in my awakening that I felt like a very like a Padawan. I just did. And then I also made this decision that you know, unlike the Jedi who have the braid cut off when they reach knighthood, that I would always keep my braid so that I would acknowledge the eternal student in myself. Mm. And it's just like so interesting how that landed in me and what it did in me.
Yeah, and you being the person with the Padawan braid attracts other people, and it does something to other people, whether you realize it or not. But there's an interest of like, oh,
Well, the first time I took it on Jam Cruise. I don't know if you know what Jam Cruise is, and people are just like,
guess what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, people knew, they saw it, they knew it, you know. And then I remember not soon after that, I was at a grocery store, and this woman was just checking me out, and she was doing one of these things. She's like looking at me and then looking down. She's like, is that a Padawan braid? And then this is something that happens to me now. And then not soon after that, I was being waited on, and the guy, where you'd put like some note, like how you distinguish one table from another, he wrote Padawan in the thing. So it's it's just interesting to see it activate people in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a seedling. Yeah,
it's not just that, but like, I think on some level, you know, I wish there was Jedi. You know, I wish that there were people that were, you know, like really out for the public good in that way, in contact with ancient wisdom in the modern context.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it gets back to just sort of like where we are right now, and the language we're using, and the structures and the symbols, and how we could maybe start to have like little incubation hubs, mystery schools, practice training facility type things.
Yeah, the thing that I want is that we get out of the way. We get out of the way of it instead of building like monuments and temples and things like that. Right. Instead of the Ozymandias approach, you know, because I feel like that's where we like drop the ball. You know, we like took credit instead of let the Tao do its thing. The Tao does not take credit, yet does not laud over it. Its accomplishments, you know, and it's has historically, you know, in the beginning of my awakening, it's been hard for me to let go of the credit part, because it's like where my somebodyness got validation.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it was so hard to get validation for my somebodyness outside of me telling war stories about me and my drug dealing escapades.
Well, yeah. And so in a way, though, you've had to go through these phases in order to impart this wisdom to people that are coming up now. And then they can, you know, experience it for themselves, but have that sort of, guide, facilitator, person who's a little further on the path, shine a light to, you know, watch out for that.
But I wouldn't have been receptive to myself.
Yeah, but someone else would have been.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
I think that about that a lot too.
There's a lot of people out there that they're ready and they're receptive.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, that's I guess that's my temperature right now.
All right. Well, that sounds good. I think that's a wrap. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about a lot of cool things, and I think we'll end it there. And you know, we'll be back for another riff, another wrap.
Yeah. You know, we live together, and we talk about this stuff all the time. So it's, you know, I always wonder like what's going to come out on the spot, because a lot of our like breakfast table conversations are just so spicy and alive, you know, and how are we going to like curate when we make an appointment to sit and talk?
Yeah. Well, we've, in a way, the non-recorded talks are, you know, when we're in the state of like formlessness, and here we are in the state of form, and this is it.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Travis. Is there anywhere that you want people to go and find you or contact you or?
I have a lot of my work is actually online. If you want to see a lot about my activism and about current projects that I'm in, you can Google my name, Travis Tyler Fluck, and my last name is F as in Frank, Luck. On the socials, on Instagram, I have 2 accounts. One is view_askew, and the other one is the Denver Mushroom Cooperative.
All right, cool.
And I'm pretty, I put a lot of content up.
Awesome. Great. Check him out, folks. He'll be back. We'll be back. Thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. Leave a rating and review, comment. Love you all. Bye-bye.